Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Overcoming the Forgetting Curve. My name is Nurhai Jerez, and along with my colleague, Maria Alegra, we will be serving as your moderators. On behalf of the Central American and the Caribbean Basin TESOL affiliates and then TESOL, thank you so much for joining us today. The countries that are part of these affiliates are Belize, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Venezuela. I'd like to talk to you about our upcoming events. TESOL call for nominations for the period 2019-2021 Executive Board. From May the 15th and June the 15th, 2019, first Vice President, second Vice President, and third Vice President, communications coordinators, secretary, treasurer, and state representative. During the Passion for Teaching Kickoff Tour, Mérida, Monagas, Trujillo, Carabobo, Yaracuy, and Zulia, from June the 17th and July the 5th. During the Passion for Teaching 2019, TESOL Kickoff Tour, ACPI TESOL Costa Rica Convention 2019, Competences and Teaching Practices for Effective Performance, from July the 3rd to the 5th. TESOL 37th National Convention, Fueling the Passion for Teaching, from July the 20th to the 23rd, 2019. If you are a media user, these are our media contacts, TESOL Community of Practice. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar session. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the chat box on YouTube. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end of the presentation. Moreover, a certificate of attendance will be emailed by PDF format upon successful completion of this webinar. In order to earn this certification, you will be emailed by TESOL, and you have to reply to this email answering 2 out of 3 questions correctly. The questionnaire will be sent in the following 2 days. Please wait for it. Now moving along to our webinar, let's talk about today's session, Overcoming the Forgetting Curve. Ebbinghaus' theory of the forgetting curve explains how humans tend to forget what they learn very soon, even in days or weeks, if not reviewed and put into practice frequently. Repetition has always been considered a key factor in language learning. The question is, what kinds of tasks promote meaningful repetition that helps beat the forgetting curve? Repeating may be thought of as a mechanical, mindless task. What we are proposing in this session is the incorporation of mindful repetition, noticing patterns and chunks with practical context, and adding an element of reflection and improvement. In this webinar, we will present information about these concepts and will discuss techniques that promote repetition in varied and engaging ways. And at the end of this webinar, you participants will leave with a clear understanding of the concepts and with new ideas of teaching techniques that you can put into practice right away. Now let me talk to you about our today's presenter. She is Leticia Vela. She holds a BS in Administration with a Finance specialty, a certificate for overseas teachers of English from Cambridge University, TKT certificates for Module 1, 2, and 3 from Cambridge TESOL, a Master's in Education from Buffalo State University, and a certificate in Management by New Ways. She has been teaching English as a foreign language for more than 20 years. She was an instructor and thesis advisor for the Masters in Bilingual Education at Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, Unit 2A2. She was the head of the Languages Division and coordinated instructor for the BA in Applied Linguistics at the American School of Tampico, where she worked for 15 years. She is a teacher trainer and has collaborated with various bilingual schools in the cities of Tampico, Madero, and Altamira. While working as an academic coordinator at the American School Language Institute, Leticia received the TESOL Award for international participation at the 2008 convention in New York. Additionally, when coordinated the Self-Access Center at the ATSL the center received the 2009 TOEFL Library and Resource Center Award. Leticia has been a speaker for TESOL, MEX TESOL, GESS, and BBELT. She volunteered in MEX TESOL as treasurer for the Tampico chapter in the period 2009-2011 and as vice president in the period 2011 and 2012. Then as a treasurer for the National Governing Board in the period 2013-2015 and as convention chair for Monterrey 2016 and Leon 2017. Presently, she is a consultant for Oxford University Press, a speaking examiner for Cambridge Assessment English, and the director of U Speak Training Center. So it's a pleasure for me introduce you Leticia Vela. Hello, Leticia. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for the invitation. How's everyone? Sorry for the long introduction. We're about to start.
No, but this is necessary. We are really happy having you today with all your experience and with this very interesting topic that you have for us today. Welcome and thank you so much for being here, Leticia, with us. Thank you.
No, thank you, and welcome, and thank you everyone who has tuned in. We're going to start right away. I know it's Saturday. So I'd like to start by asking, have your students ever said something like, we already saw this. We've already seen this. This is like the third time. Does that happen to you? It happens to me a lot, and to teachers in Mexico. They actually say, teacher, we already know this. Right? In most cases, they remember having studied something about it or having learned something about the grammar. But the question is, are they able to actually use the language like in this cartoon, right? They know the grammar, but can they use it, or is the vocabulary active in their use of the language? So why is it that they do not use it, do you think? Surely there are many explanations, but today I would like to address the theory that might explain part of this. And this is Hermann Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve, which relates how much information we retain with the pass of time. This is him. This is not something new. But when I came across information about his research, I was fascinated. And I think it is very useful to look back at this and apply some of his findings to language learning. So, who is he? A German psychologist who conducted the first major studies of memory and studied both learning and retention. He talked about the savings effect when he tested learning the same list of nonsense words 2 times. The second time, after he had forgotten them, he realized that it took him 50% less time to learn these words. So he concluded that we learned a familiar list more quickly than a non-familiar one. And that there is some learning that is unconscious that we can stimulate and recall in less time. His first major studies are from 1885. And the main problem with his studies, or what we question, is that he did all these studies with himself. He was the subject of the studies. So, but he provided with the basis for this research, and there's a lot of research that has been done around what he did, and it's fascinating. I invite you to read that, some of that. So let's look at the forgetting curve that I actually show my students at the beginning of each course. I have adult students, but you can show them to your kids as well, or even teens. Maybe we might need to adapt it a bit so they understand it. But basically what the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve shows is that this over here is retention rates, and this is the time, right? After a class ends, we remember only about 75% at the end of a lecture. So we remember less. Then after 10 minutes, the curve starts declining. We remember less and less and less. And look at how much we remember, according to Ebbinghaus, after a month. So this is scary. Teachers invest so much time in planning, so much effort in teaching, and our students forget. But what happens if we review after 10 minutes of class, or the day after, a week after, or a month after? The curve starts changing, okay? So there's potential to forget less and remember more if we review immediately after class, and even more if we do repetitive reviews, like we can see here. So this is how the curve changes when there's repetition or review. A review after 10 minutes, 24 hours, one week later, a review, and then a month later, or even sooner, a 4th review. So there's hope. The curve changes completely. So this is what I'd like to talk about. There's a solution. And the solution is the 3 R's: repeat, redo, review, and all the R's that you see here: rethink, revise, revisit, right? There is extensive research that shows that repetition enhances learning, okay? The value of repetition as a means of achieving fluency has been repeated over and over in literature, on everything in language learning, task-based learning, and many other approaches. When learners repeat a task, even a relatively long time after its first performance, learners improve both in fluency and accuracy. This is because they build upon their previous experiences. Also, corpus linguistics show that we recycle not only what we say, but also what others say. So this repeating and putting into practice many times the language we're learning produces internalization of the language. And this is why learners learn a lot from doing this type of tasks and from doing them with their peers. Let's see. So repeating the same task several times, this is the bottom line, enhances learning. Now, the communicative approach tends to value spontaneity, creativity, fluency, right? However, if we provide speaking practice only under those conditions, there is the risk that learners will always be improvising and experimenting with the new forms, and they won't master them, or they won't acquire them. So the question is, will they be able to use those forms again fluently? That's the question. So how to overcome the forgetting curve, and how to give students enough opportunities to practice these forms. And there's the question of boredom, right? Repetition sounds boring, and it can be very boring, and we've seen that in methods of the past, right? How to overcome the forgetting curve and also boredom, and this is the focus of my session today. First of all, repetition needs to be meaningful, okay? Repetition of language that matters to students, that is useful, that is personal, that it has to do with them, that is local. A lot of exercises or programs talk about places around the world, and that's very interesting, but we have to localize the language, make it about their environment, their context. And then repetition and everything, I think, in language learning needs to be engaging. I think engagement is a key factor in learning, not just language learning. When you have engaged students, when they do things because they want to and not because they have to, it makes the whole difference. So repetition that learners want to get involved in is the type of repetition that we want to promote. And they want to get involved in it because they see the results. So if we tell them a little bit about the forgetting curve and the reasons behind that, and our activities are meaningful and engaging, they will want to be involved, and they'll see the results. Repetition needs to be contextualized within a practical situation where learners can understand the meaning and use the language. And they also understand when to use it. If we work on a context around the activities, repetition needs to be frequent enough as we saw in the forgetting curve, revisiting the language in spaced intervals of time is very, very productive. I'd like to suggest 5-minute warm-ups and 5-minute wrap-ups after certain activities, or at the end of a lesson or a section of your day, maybe pop-up quizzes or quick teach each other sessions where your learners teach each other. So there are many things we can do to provide opportunities for repetition that include all these elements. And also that repetition is varied, creative active learning strategies, different ways to revisit the target language. So with these elements, I believe we can overcome the forgetting curve and also the boredom of repeating certain structures, right? Now, I would like to focus on the concept of, variety, the last point here. Variety is really important, not only when promoting repetition to overcome the forgetting curve, but in education and in learning in general. For this purpose, what I mean by variety is vary the amount of support or the degree of challenge of the activity. So, for example, we can vary how much help we provide or the difficulty of certain tasks. That's an area to vary. Something else to vary is the mode or skill. For example, repeating something or a certain target language, first speaking and then repeating it in writing. Or we can even change the manner in which we repeat, say conveying emotions when repeating a sentence or a chant. We can also vary the amount of time your students have to do certain things. The first time they have more time, and you reduce the amount of time, or the other way around. When you want them to brainstorm, a quick brainstorm, you time them, and then you give them more time to develop their ideas. That's another example. Now they can also vary the different partners. Practice an activity at least 3 times with different partners is very, very interesting, because they are practicing, but every time they talk with someone else, the conversation is new. Also, the interactions individually, then repetition in pairs, repeating the task. That's what I mean by repetition. Then in groups of 4. Okay, so I would like to show you some activities that promote this type of variety. Okay, let's start with the degree of challenge, and I want to show you an example of disappearing dialogues. This is an example of something that can be practiced as a conversation about Christmas in Australia. Do we have any people from Australia? And then you start disappearing first. You can do this on PowerPoint, or you can do this on the board, and you start disappearing certain words depending on your language focus, and they perform again the task without those words. And you can also disappear certain sentences or certain questions until you disappear the whole dialogue, and they do it a final time, but with no support. This is an example. You can also do disappearing sentences for maybe kids or lower levels. You disappear words instead of sections of conversation. You disappear certain words until you disappear the whole sentence. Okay, that's another idea. For motor skill, I really like this activity. I don't know if you are familiar with it, and you're probably familiar with some of these, and that's fine. It's important to revisit some things, and maybe we stopped doing them in the classroom and we can go back to doing them again. The 4-2-1 free write. This is like a graphic organizer. I use it for reading lessons or for listening lessons. And individually, students identify the four main ideas of the reading or the listening, and then in pairs they compare their ideas and they come up, they negotiate and they decide on the two central ideas of the listening or the reading or the article they are working on. And then two pairs get together with two other pairs and make groups of four, and the four of them share their central ideas and decide on the one big idea of the reading or the listening. And then they go back to working individually, and on the back of this sheet of paper or on any sheet of paper in their notebooks, they do a free write. They write everything that they learned and they describe the one big idea. This is very, very useful, and it's helpful for those learners who don't like writing. Once they've talked about all these ideas, they have a lot to write about. It's really, it gets students engaged, involved, and with very good results. Okay, another example of this is paper conversations. Have you done paper conversations? It's like an online chat. I actually tell my students that imagine it's an online chat, but you are writing your ideas on a piece of paper. Once they finish the conversation in writing, the paper conversation, then they put the paper away, and in person they have the conversation speaking. An example of a variety and amount of time, the 4-3-2 technique. Have you heard of it? This is more or less how it works. Student A, well, you divide your group in students A and B. Student A, you give them a question, or you give them, you ask them to summarize something. The task can vary, and the possibilities are endless. But say you give them a question to write about. Student A thinks about it and writes notes and prepares. And then you ask them to find a student B partner, and they talk. The student A explains or talks about what he or she prepared, and student B1 listens and takes notes. It's important that there's always a reason to listen to. There's always a reason. There should always be a reason for learners to listen to each other. Either they need information or they're in a conversation. There's always a real conversation. There's always a reason to listen to, if we're interested in the conversation, of course, to the other person. But in this case, I asked them to take notes, and then I timed them, and they only have 4 minutes to give their message, to share their message. And then I stop them, and they find someone else, another B student, but now they have 3 minutes to share their message or their ideas. Student B, the second student B, takes notes, and then they go on. I stop them after 3 minutes. They go on to a third student B, but now for 2 minutes. And then they go back to student B's, get a question, they prepare, and you repeat all this, but switching roles. And then at the end, you ask them to make groups of 4 and share the most interesting things they took note of, or what was I don't know, their summaries. Again, the possibilities are endless. So in this activity, they're repeating in a different way 5 times. First when they're preparing, then with the first second, and third. And then when they get together in the group, they can get together in the group after the first round. And then when students B prepare, after the 3 rounds, they get together and share. This is a little bit time consuming, but it works wonders for reviews. It's a way to prepare the reviews, and what students work on to share can be something that they need to study. A variety also, if you want to make it shorter, is instead of 4-3-2, it could be 3-2-1. When I do training sessions with teachers to add a level of challenge, I ask them to speak for 3-2-1, and they need to make decisions on how to express their message, because since they have very little time, they have to say things very clearly and very concisely. So I really like this technique. Now, in terms of variety of partners, speed speaking is a really cool activity. That's what my students say. This is really cool, teacher. Well, it's like speed dating, but they're not dating, so they're speed speaking, but it works more or less the same way. And I found this. The idea is that they're having the conversation or discussing a question or explaining something to each other like this for a certain amount of time, say 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on your timing. And then you stop them and they rotate. Well, I don't know if this is rotate, but student 4 goes back to the beginning, and so they start again, and they're talking to someone else. And then you stop after the time limit, and again, student 3 moves to the beginning, and they're speaking to someone else. And you can do it a 4th time. And so every time they have the conversation, they improve. The others are listening, and they should be asking questions, making comments, and giving follow-up information. So it really is a conversation. Remember, the listeners need to have something to do, a reason to listen. Either take notes, ask questions, make comments, or give follow-up information. And then they switch roles. It's the other side who does the speaking, and the others, and this side, I'm sorry, these students here do the speaking, and then they move in the line. Okay. A variety of this. Have you heard of the onion technique? The onion technique is the same thing, but instead of lines, 2 circles, an inner circle and an outer circle, and either of the 2 rotates, and they're speaking to someone else. So later on in the comments, you can let us know if you've used any of these or the varieties we talked about, and how that has worked. Now, I'd like to move on to the importance of repetition being mindful. And what does this mean? It means that, like I said before, it has to be meaningful. Repetition needs to be meaningful. Learners need to be able to see the results. Okay, and for this purpose, I have some suggestions here. Learners take turns focusing on target language, 2-minute group, and then they give 2-minute group feedback. So let me give you an example. Okay, so for example, student A and student B have the conversation, and student C is just noticing. So what I also mean by mindful repetition is that there is a focus on the language, right? There's some feedback. In the rush to get through the course book or the syllabus, we sometimes forget the importance of feedback. and wrapping up the activities. And yeah, they do it 1, 2, 3 times, and we go back to the whatever it is we're doing in the lesson, and we skip the part of noticing the language, being mindful of what students are saying and how they're supposed to be saying it. Okay, so in this example, students have the conversation, and student C is noticing the language and taking notes. And after this, the student C gives the pair feedback on what they said and what was really interesting, what they said well, and what he or she thinks they need to improve for 2 minutes. And then they switch roles. Okay, so here the idea is that we encourage noticing the language. Okay, another option for mindful repetition is recording. All the conversations that we're repeating, students can record them, and by listening to themselves after, maybe you can assign this for homework, they can listen to themselves, they receive self-feedback. Sometimes they feel like, oh, I'm so fluent, but when they hear themselves, it's like, oh my God, I need to polish my pronunciation, or I know that I should be using my verbs like this in simple past, but I'm not saying them. And so this is an eye-opening for them, and they get more involved and engaged in continuing practicing. Another strategy for mindful repetition is transcribing. They transcribe their recordings, and they can. It is important that they transcribe as is, with everything they're saying, whatever they're saying right, and also what they're not saying correctly. And then they analyze their transcription and correct the mistakes, or they can share their transcriptions and correct each other, and give feedback to each other. Remember, feedback needs to be what they found interesting, what the expressions they're using, and then what they can improve, positive and improvement areas. And another idea for mindful repetition, for it to be more productive, is when you wrap up the activities, reflect with your students what the patterns are, which are useful chunks, which chunks they can use in the following activity or in future conversations. This reflective part of these activities where we repeat is very important for them to work and be productive in a way. This is another part of repeating what they're learning, because they're analyzing and they're analyzing it, and they're looking at what can be useful in other conversations. Okay. Now I understand that we have a lot to do in our courses. We have programs that are sometimes saturated, and it's okay. It's okay. But we need to add variety. We need to revisit. We need to review if we want our students to learn, like we saw in the forgetting curve. I mean, it's based on research, so we have to find opportunities and places where we can put into practice these strategies. And sometimes repetition in the form of revisiting and reviewing tends to be neglected, precisely because we don't have enough time. So I'd like to propose this to help out the Czars strategy. First, let's try to supplement a unit or lesson, add activities that promote quality repetition wherever possible, especially when you realize that there's not enough time to not enough opportunities to practice. When you identify parts in your lessons where there's not enough opportunities to practice, we need to supplement, and we need to adapt our programs, um, our books, our textbooks, add a couple of steps to some activities to encourage meaningful repetition is very important. We need to sometimes reject. We don't have to do everything in the book. Skip certain parts or activities that do not help learners achieve the communicative goals that you're aiming for. It's okay. We don't need to do everything. And it's important that we tell our students the whys, why we're not doing this, and they'll be okay with it. And also substitute certain activities, replace them with different tasks that add opportunities for meaningful repetition, and that add that element of variety. And please make sure that you add the mindfulness part of focusing on the language and noticing what they need to improve to become better speakers of the language, better in the language every time they write and speak. This is from the Teaching Grammar Communicatively MOOC. I don't know if you joined it. I really recommend it. And to finish this, I'd like to cite Claire Cranch to encourage you to implement these activities. We may want to put the principle of iterability to work. The same text, reread silently or aloud, can yield new meanings. The same utterance, repeated in various contexts with different inflections, can index different emotions, evoke different associations. The same poem, memorized and performed 2 or 3 times in front of the same class, yields each time new pleasures of recognition and anticipation. The same story told to 3 different interlocutors can enable the storyteller to put different emphasis on the same general theme depending on the listener. So repetition, planned properly, is very productive, is very helpful for language learners. I encourage you to put some of these activities into practice and notice the results yourselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Leticia. It has been a very captivating presentation today for this webinar that is given by TESOL and the countries from Central America and the Caribbean. And well, I would like to read some of the comments that people have done. And I have to greet Carlos Mayorga, who is among the viewers. Hello, Carlos. And he says, that's a really interesting topic. I've never heard about it before. Thanks, Letty and TESOL, for such a wonderful way of learning. Okay, we also have Teresa Almeida Deta. She says, she has a question for you, Leticia. And she says, what level students do you suggest to start this activity with? Intermediate? Hello? Are you there? Letty? Can you hear me?
There, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay.
You're sharing your right? You're sharing your screen, right?
Yes.
Could you please stop and maybe if you want to show yourself, your picture, you can
yes.
on your camera and you speak.
There.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for reminding me that. And the question is, the level students should be to start doing this type of activity, right?
Uh-huh. That's a question. Yes.
The answer is they can start the first day of class, and I really recommend that.
Okay, but to everybody, to all, all levels, beginners, intermediate, advanced. So that's what she wants to know.
Yes, absolutely, all levels. Of course, at each level, they're going to be working on different conversations, right? Beginner levels probably phrases, and that's okay. But they need the repetition at all levels. They need the meaningful and mindful repetition to internalize the language, and so that after class, they don't forget, right? That's our goal, that they acquire the language.
It's incredible how behaviorism is involved in all this. I mean, still some people may think that behaviorism is an old theory and an old topic to talk about. But look, I mean, you're talking about something that is current. It's a current topic. I mean, we forget about the things we learn, and behaviorism is involved here. So repetition really works. And it's very current. It's something that is current. Well, we'll see. Here we have another question, Leti. Javier Moreno says, how do you overcome students that are not that much motivated?
Well, that's a topic for another webinar. But I think that engagement is the key. And sometimes, yes, they're not motivated, they're not engaged. But when they see results, when they see that they are actually able to express themselves little by little, they're making improvement. And you let them know the whys. It's really important to let them know the why. Why are we doing this a second time with a bit of variety? Why are we doing this? Show them the forgetting curve, and you'll see that little by little they'll get involved, they'll understand, and they'll see their improvement. And when they see results, they get motivated. I'm sure of that.
Okay, thank you. I have a question myself now that I heard your presentation, and most of the activities you suggest are in groups. People work collaboratively, right? Most of them. And what do we do with the introverted people who don't want to speak and don't want to practice because they're shy? What would you say?
I know. Again, it's a matter of practice, huh?
Yeah.
Personality, we cannot change. And of course, extroverted learners will speak much more. But introverts will also learn to speak with what they feel comfortable, but maybe not so much, but they will participate little by little. Again, it's a matter of practice and repeating. And when they get enrolled in this type of class dynamics, it gets to a point where, okay, this is how it's going to be with this teacher, and I'm learning, I'm remembering things, I'm improving, I'm going to participate.
And I think it is also a matter of making them aware, right?
Yes.
Remind them. I mean, if you don't practice, if you don't repeat, if you don't follow this, and that, I mean, you won't get your goal. You won't reach your goal. So, I mean, they also need to know that is not only, I mean, to know and see the practice and dynamic, but to remind them, right, that they need to do it. They need to repeat as many times as possible. Okay.
And part of raising awareness is showing the forgetting curve. I show my students the forgetting curve. And I tell them, look, I mean, you're investing a lot of time and money in learning, and look where your learning is going. Look at the retention rates. If you don't practice, review, do the workbook, participate in the online activities, And it's like, and sometimes when they stop doing it, I show it again and raise awareness. And it's a matter of insisting, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we're seeing if there are more questions or comments from the attendees.
Mhm.
Let's see. Okay. It seems that we don't have more questions. Okay, there is another one.
Okay.
It says here, how can we as teachers introduce this topic on our students in order to help them to understand this? I think it's what you just said, right?
Exactly. I think that we need to raise awareness. And if think about the speed speaking activity. Part of the wrap up can be, they prepare, they say it one time, or they have the conversation once, and then the line moves, and they have this conversation twice. The line moves, they have the conversation 3 times. You can even add a fourth, whatever you decide. You finish the activity, and then you have the mindful reflection. Okay, compare the first time you had the conversation with the third of the fourth time. How was it different? Oh, I was much more fluent. I incorporated a word from my partner. I remembered this other word and I put it in the conversation. And so by this is another way to raise awareness of how, when we do something repeatedly, the more we do it, the better we're at it. It's just common sense, I think, right? But
Yeah.
by showing showing them, so showing it like this to them, so they can see the clearly the improvement they have after a first, second, third, fourth time. It's very useful to do it like this. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Here we have another question. I think maybe it's the last. It says, could you tell us a bit more about your experience with the Czars strategy?
Sure. Well, it's very useful, productive, because your plan and what you're doing in the classroom is exactly what your students need. I don't know if whoever is asking the question follows a course book. Course books are wonderful, of course, but not everything in the course book is suitable for your students. Sometimes your learners already know a certain target language, and it's in the book, and a lot of times we decide to do it because it's in the book, right? But they don't need it because they know it. And instead of doing that certain activity, you can replace it by maybe some of these activities that are going to be much more productive and useful for your students. So I look at the content I have to teach. I look at my goals and I make decisions. I'm going to do, and even change the order of certain exercises. In some books, for example, the lesson starts with a grammar box. How can you start a lesson with a grammar box? I mean, where's the context, right?
Exactly.
So no, let's go to the conversation, and I even have them experiment with the language before I even present any grammar, and I then ask them to discover the grammar, and then we wrap up by going to the grammar box. And if there were any questions, okay, let's look at the patterns. But we need to question how things are presented, the content that we're going to be working with, and how we can adapt it to our students' needs, and what is going to give us more results. Remember, understanding by design. Have you heard of that? Very simply, when you plan your instruction, it starts with your goal. The first thing, your goals, and what it is that you need to reach those goals. And secondly, what evidence will you get from your students that they met the goal, right? What are your assessments? How are you going to obtain evidence from certain activities in class, from quizzes, from tests? Once you have that aligned, your goals and your assessments, and how you're going to obtain formal and informal evidence of those goals being met, then you plan your instruction and you say, okay, for my students to achieve those goals, I'm going to work on this section, this section, this section, this other section doesn't take me and my students there. So maybe if I have time, I'll look at that. But if not, I'm going to focus on this that is going to take me to and my students, my learners, to reach our goals. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a topic also for another webinar.
Okay. Thank you very much. Here we have Davy Sanchez saying hello, Leti.
Hello, Carlos and David. David.
And I also have a message here from Pia from Mexico. You know her very well. She says, I wish you the best, Leti. I'm applying Cambridge exam, so I won't be able to hear it. So, but she's sending messages to let you know that she will maybe listen to the webinar later. All right, she's busy now. Okay, Leti, it has been a very beautiful, engaging presentation. I love it. I was 100% paying attention to everything. I am one of the moderators, but I mean, it was really interesting. And I paid attention, okay? So, yeah, I was always there. And it was very beautiful. Congratulations. So now, would you like to say anything before I close our webinar?
I want to say thanks again for the invitation. It was a great experience, and thanks for your support. Definitely, thank you so much. Thanks everyone who tuned in, and I wanted to say hello to Pia, Carlos, and Davis.
Yeah, so good. They're around. I mean, and there are more other people from other places. I mean, people from, let me tell you, Venezuela, India, Ukraine, Thailand, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Greece, Honduras, Ecuador, Spain, United States, Portugal, Colombia, Belize, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, who else? Vietnam, Great Britain, Panama, France, Mexico. Hello. I mean, they registered for this webinar. Maybe they are not all in this during the live session, but they will be later. They will check and visualize this presentation later. So very good, excellent. It was very interesting, really. So
I'd like to add, if you want to read more about a lot of the things I talked about are from Scott Thornberry, A to Z in ELT, and a lot of his work, he talks about repetition and meaningful repetition, and he cites other authors who also address that. So if you want to read more, that's a very interesting place to start.
Okay, so good. More comments saying thank you, what a wonderful webinar, great presentation, etc., etc. So, but we need to finish because it's taken. I mean, it's been very interesting, and there have been many questions. But we need to say goodbye. And okay, I will share my my screen because I need to show you again. Here my presentation. I don't know if you can see it. Can you? Okay, so we need to remind you that this webinar was presented by TESOL and the Central American and the Caribbean Basin TESOL affiliates. And I would like to remind you events, and I would like to tell you that today we end the call for nominations for the executive board of TESOL for the period 2019-2021. And that we have our kickoff previous to the National Convention in Mérida, Monagas, Trujillo, Carabobo, Yaracuy, and Zulia between June 17th and July the 5th. And that Oh, very important. This is for Carlos Mayorga and all the people from Costa Rica who are here in this webinar. So there is the National Convention Competences and Teaching Practices for Effective Performance on July the 3rd to the 5th in San Jose of Costa Rica. And we have here, TESOL has its national convention, Fueling the Passion for Teaching, on July the 20th and the 21st. And finally, so here, if you want to contact TESOL, our community of practice, through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and here on our YouTube channel. I'll let you know that in the following days, you will receive a questionnaire with 3 questions in order to receive your digitized certificate for this webinar. Okay, and well, I would like to thank you for being here today. I hope you have a great weekend and happy Father's Day tomorrow for those who have father and for those who is Father's Day tomorrow. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.